Good evening, I'm Alexandra with the Daily Grind. Welcome back to my channel. Tonight I'm going to talk to you about the follow-up interviews I've done since my last post. And if you didn't watch my last post, I talked about how I am from the Roseville, Citrus Heights area where Joseph DeAngelo, the alleged Golden State Killer, original Night Stalker, or whatever you want to call him, is from. He lived, within a mile from me growing up, 4 miles from me now. So it was very shocking to my community. And then to add fuel to the fire, Sharon Huddle is a family law attorney, and if you're not familiar with the case, which I'm guessing you are, which is why you're watching this video, she's a family law attorney in the Sacramento area, and I'm a family law attorney as well. So this case kind of really hit home for me, and I just found it really interesting. Joseph DeAngelo was a police officer. He was let go from his position as a police officer because he shoplifted, and Sharon Huddle is a family law attorney, and they're married. So it's very interesting dynamic. And not to mention, before this news broke, I've been talking to some colleagues of mine, and Sharon Huddle's name got brought up, and they were talking about basically her reputation. And I don't want to go too far into that, but at that time during a committee that I'm in, I Googled her and saw her Yelp page, and the reviews were pretty bad, pretty much stating that she yelled at her employees, she yelled at her clients, and so I was intrigued, and then this news broke, and so I was even more intrigued. So I've been following this story and sharing it with you, my viewers, because it's very interesting to me, and I'm sure interesting to you as well. So I wanted to follow up with my last post where I talked about how I'm going to interview members of the community who knew Sharon or know Sharon Huddle, and I have done that. Many of my sources have chosen to remain anonymous due to the sensitive nature of this case, which is very understandable. There is one person who I was not expecting to interview. She's been in the news a lot. She was a victim of DeAngelo, and she's spoken out. She has a very inspirational story. Very strong woman. Just really, I think, a role model to many people, especially young women who have been in situations or have endured such traumatic circumstances as this woman did. And I will tell you her name and give you a little bit of her story that she shared with me. I've also spoken to members of the community who, because of our profession, have chosen to remain anonymous, but I will share what they told me with you. In addition, I spoke to a former client of Sharon Huddle's who shared her insight on Huddle, and I know my last post was maybe a little bit critical of her, but I am happy to inform you, and I want to present both sides of the story. So this woman, she had valuable insight into Huddle and her inner workings, and also advocated that she was a great attorney for her, and did achieve favorable results, although she did spend an incredible amount of money, and the case was never finalized by Huddle. But that aside, she did have some really good things to say. So I'm going to share that with you today. And before I get into all of this, I'm only going to briefly touch on what I talked about, with these people, because it's kind of long. So I did write a blog post, and I will share the link underneath this video. So if you want to read the whole story and the interviews on what these people said, I posted an article, and you can refer to that if you want, more details. So I also wanted to update you. There's been new developments in the case. DeAngelo has been charged with 4 additional murders, and these murders occurred in Santa Barbara in the late 70s, early 80s. So the importance of this is that now he has been officially charged with 12 murders across the state of California. Additionally, the murders that occurred in Santa Barbara County, actually Goleta, where I happened to live when I went to college. I went to UCSB. Goleta is a town right next to Santa Barbara, within walking distance, a mile or two. Most people biked to school from Goleta. So another kind of factor that hits home to me, very, very weird situation. So these couples, the women were, so the assailant, allegedly DeAngelo, broke into these people's homes with a gun and murdered both of the men and raped the women and allegedly murdered them during the commission of a rape. And if you're not familiar with criminal law, if in the process of a rape a murder occurs, that elevates it to a capital murder charge, meaning DeAngelo is now eligible for the death penalty. I'm not sure really how much that means in the grand scheme of things, other than the fact that his life in prison is going to be more miserable because a death penalty hasn't happened in California for quite some time. But it is significant. So that's the latest on the charges that DeAngelo is being accused of. And I apologize if I'm a little scattered. I didn't prepare a script or anything. I'm just kind of speaking off the top of my head. So bear with me. But I wanted to update you with the latest, what's going on with the case. I also wanted to talk to you about what members of the community said about Sharon Huddle and Joseph DeAngelo. I know there are rumors that Sharon Huddle and DeAngelo are divorced. A lot of news stations have been saying. And then others have been saying estranged, and I said that I didn't believe that they separated until 9 months ago. While I can't give you definitive proof of that, I can provide you with information that my colleagues gave me. My colleagues chose, again, to remain anonymous because we really are a small community, especially in the family law business, and I'm putting myself out there because I believe that the public has a right to know this information, but I definitely understand why most people wouldn't want to do that. So what I was informed of was that Sharon Huddle and Joseph DeAngelo had an extremely volatile relationship. And as I stated before, Sharon Huddle's not a shrinking violet. She stands her ground. She's definitely aggressive and domineering. So I can only imagine how with someone like DeAngelo, that would escalate to unbelievable levels. So their neighbors and friends reported that their relationship was extremely volatile, unhealthy. I read in the news that other neighbors wouldn't let their children play with the DeAngelo's children because of this relationship that they shared. So in the 90s, Sharon Huddle, presumably they had a falling out, and she purchased a home in Roseville. And if you're not familiar with the Sacramento area in Northern California, Roseville is right on the border of Citrus Heights. When I grew up in Roseville, but my family's house was literally on the border of Citrus Heights. So they're right next to each other. And what my source told me was that Sharon Huddle would pretty much split her time between the two houses. So the marriage wasn't really over. They still acted as a couple, as husband and wife and parents to their children. And in addition, another interesting fact, and I'm not sure if this has hit the news or not, but I was informed, and again, this segment alone with regard to Huddle and DeAngelo and their relationship, I have not verified these facts. So please take this with a grain of salt, and you can do your own research to determine whether it's true or not. But I can tell you that the people who gave me this information are attorneys in the Placer County area, and they do know the couple, and they do know Sharon Huddle. So what you want to take away from that, please do. I believe it's accurate information, but I don't want to steer you wrong. So I'm just sharing what I've learned with you. And what I also learned was that at some point in the 90s, Sharon Huddle and DeAngelo lived in Southern California. During that time, they still maintained their residence in Citrus Heights, Northern California. During the period of time that DeAngelo and Sharon Huddle resided in Southern California, the original Night Stalker, as he was initially called, these crimes were taking place in Southern California. So I believe that's significant because during a period of time, I think 2 or 3 years, DeAngelo was actually living in Southern California, and I don't think that that has been divulged yet. So we'll wait and see. We'll see if this information is accurate. I also wanted to update you on some information I learned, and I didn't learn this through a personal interview, but I did learn it through reading an article on the internet, and I do feel that it has relevance into the issues that I've been speaking about. So in case you haven't heard this information, I wanted to update you with it. If you haven't heard of Paul Holes, he was the investigator for Contra Costa District Attorney's Office, which is very close to the area that I live in and that DeAngelo lived in, or lives in. But he was the lead investigator on the case and spent 24 years of his career trying to locate the Golden State Killer, or at that time, the original Night Stalker. He had some interesting things to say. He spoke out, May 4th, at CrimeCon, which I never heard of it until now, but it's a national true crime convention, and it was held on May 4th, and he spoke at a panel. And a very, very interesting question that one of the audience members asked him, and his response really intrigued me, and I wanted to share that with you. An audience member asked Holes if Huddle, who was allegedly estranged from DeAngelo for 20 years and is a family law attorney, presumably as a family law attorney, I mean, she could represent herself. She's very well versed in law. Why didn't she divorce him if the relationship is so volatile? So the viewer or the audience member asked this question and asked if Holes believed if Huddle did not divorce DeAngelo because she wanted to claim a marital privilege, and so she wouldn't be forced to testify. And Holes' response was very, very interesting. And before I tell you what his response is, I want to give you a little background into the law and as to why this question was asked. So, California Evidence Code, it's section 970 and 971, which relates to spousal testimonial privilege. Spousal testimonial privilege, I'm going to read from my iPad right now, states that no one can be forced to testify in court, including in a criminal case, against their spouse. Importantly, this evidence code privilege does not prevent a spouse from testifying should they choose to do so, and it only applies to people who are married at the time the testimony would occur. This privilege protects the spouse from being forced to testify on matters that occurred before or during marriage, but the privilege terminates upon divorce, and the testifying spouse holds the privilege, meaning the accused spouse cannot prevent their spouse from testifying should they choose to do so. So basically, Sharon Huddle, if she's married to DeAngelo, she couldn't be forced to testify in court against him. Period. So that's why the audience member asked Holes if she remained married to him so she couldn't be compelled to testify against him in court, which is a valid question. And Holes' response was, quote, "It's an It's an unusual situation that someone so well versed in the divorce process has chosen not to have completed that process, and it becomes suspicious. I cannot go into any more detail than that at this time. Which begs the question, if he can't go into more detail, is it being investigated by the FBI and the police? I guess only time will tell, but this response to me says that he cannot divulge any information because it's under investigation by the police and it's confidential. So only time will tell. We will see, but I felt that his response was very, very interesting. Thank you for tuning in tonight. As always, I will continue to keep you updated on the situation, the Golden State Killer and Sharon Huddle. Have a great night.